Well, good afternoon and welcome. It's such a joy to be here with you. And this is a really special moment. I feel it's a moment of celebration about enormous achievements that have occurred already, and a moment of great opportunity and thinking about what will come next, all about the Institute of Politics. And so I'd like to just start by saying a few words about what David has achieved and why it's such a special moment, I think, for all of us. David, as you know, championed the idea of the Institute of Politics here at the University of Chicago as a center for civic engagement and for nonpartisan discourse. And I think it's fair to say that he's achieved, you together with him have achieved that goal in a very special way. The IOP has flourished, and it has become, in my view, a deeply integral part of the University of Chicago, as well as a place that reaches out and I think promotes a level of dialogue that our society desperately needs. So it So you certainly will be missed, David, although I think we will find ways to connect with you in every way possible. It is also an extraordinary moment, and I am just so thrilled to be able to welcome Heidi Heitkamp as the new director of the Institute of Politics. So Heidi is actually famous for a career in politics in which she has taken consistently independent, well-reasoned political positions in the interests of the community she has served and that have cut across major party dogmas. I had the opportunity during the course of this process to get to meet Heidi and to have a conversation, and I saw this. I could just see the ability that she has. In this is an era of deep polarization, and Heidi, I can see why it is that you have earned respect from across political divides. You have your own well-grounded, staunchly defended viewpoints. And you have also excelled at fostering dialogue across difference. And so I think that's the characteristic above all that makes it such a natural fit for you to be here and to lead in this next stage of the IOP. You can bring that phenomenal strength to the university and to help us to engage with the dialogue that we need. And to, in many ways, amplify the University of Chicago's commitment to free expression and reasoned dialogue, to help our society and to help others globally to harness the political process for better outcomes and for better service. So we're extremely grateful that you have decided to take on this opportunity, and I think we're all thrilled now to have this very special moment where you two will be in dialogue as the IOP transitions from one era to another. So thank you both.
Thank
you.
Thank you, Paul, for those kind words, and I want to accept them on behalf of this extraordinary staff. Zinat Rahman sitting right here, our executive director, and also on behalf of previous staffs who helped build the IOP and make it what it is, and particularly on behalf of all the students who have passed through our doors over the last 10 years and have embraced the idea of an Institute of Politics and the ethos of the Institute of Politics, and has made the Institute of Politics, as you say, I think a staple of the university, one that I sorely wish had been here a century ago when I was a student. But thank you so much. Heidi, you know, I chased you relentlessly, urging you to consider this, and I mean, it is such a gift to us that you're here. But I want to give people a sense of where you came from, and I want to start in Mantador, North Dakota, population 90 when you were growing up, and the Heitkamps were like 1/10 of the whole town.
That's correct.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's interesting, and David is the most tenacious person I have ever met. And if you ever want to understand why the IOP has been successful, be on the other side of a negotiating table with David Axelrod when he has his sights set on a goal. I called my friend Ken Conrad, whose job I took twice. I became the tax commissioner behind Kent and then eventually took Kent's seat in the Senate, and said, I used to think you were the most tenacious person I knew. And that was before I really got to know David Axelrod. But Matador, North Dakota is a small farming community, basically populated by people who migrated from Germany and some Norwegians, but there's a limit to what we would let in North Dakota in terms of our diversity. And so these families kind of migrated together. And when you understand the history of the families, you better understand how the church got built, and you better understand how the VFW got built, and you better understand why you're all playing ball together at the Ball Diamond. And so I grew up in a town that was 90 people, but it felt a lot bigger because it was family. Everybody was family, even though you may not have been related, but a lot of us were, because you basically had that common shared history. That history of migrating, the history of coming off the farm, or your parents were on the farm, or you basically went to school with kids who were farm kids. And so there wasn't a lot of diversity, to put it kind of mildly, in Matador, North Dakota, but it also was a place where you learned about community values, where you learned about the value of kind of the collective working together. I always said when we would talk about politics and the skills that you develop, I said, look, not everybody in Matador agreed. I mean, you'd sit around the coffee table and there'd be people there who would argue different points of view and different perspectives. But I said when you wanted to get up the Christmas lights in the town square, they figured out a way to do it. And when the church needed a new roof, you figured out a way to do it, even though you didn't always have that same kind of perspective on life. And so I think the flip side of that is that I also bristle, where I've now given you the idyllic view, I also bristle at this notion that that's the real America. That somehow those people who grew up the way I grew up in a rural community, with family and with church and with, veterans centers, that they somehow are better than the cab driver and their life experience in New York City. And it informs kind of that diversity, informs the challenge that we have when we look to the other. And so, my dad created the smallest VFW in the history of the VFW. He came out of World War II, said, he didn't want to go join the Legion in Hankinson, because that was full of Norwegians, I guess, I don't know. Anyway, so he decided he was going to put together the VFW chapter, and everybody told him he couldn't do it. Well, the surest way to get my dad to do something was to tell him he couldn't get it done. But those were the values that we were raised with. But the most important thing my dad taught me was not about respecting veterans or respecting the church or respecting education. The most important thing he taught me was to respect someone else's point of view. And so back in the day when that greatest generation was thrown into this great cause of World War II, they had to experience something different. And they brought those experiences back to small towns. And I think that's why we had that kind of generation of people who thought more globally or more nationally than they think today.
Well, of course, the World War II experience was one that was universally shared. Wherever you were from in this country, everybody was thrown together in this one cause. And I do think that's something that the greatest generation had that has been lost. We're so kind of fractionalized.
But you all had common cause, but you also experienced a culture outside of your own. My dad's best friend in the service was
Yes.
and it was someone from first
Yes.
generation Italian from New York.
Yes, yeah, no, we're
so,
saying the
so
same
that,
thing.
that
yeah.
kind of combination of, yes, we're all fighting the Nazis and we're doing this great thing, but also, oh yeah, where I might have thought that that person was different from me or them than my family, that's not true. That we're all Americans.
Well, that is the challenge today, though.
Yep.
How do we find those common links, those common threads that have been so shredded by our politics? Your dad was a janitor and a construction worker.
Yep.
Your mom was a cook in the schools there, and you had this idea that you wanted to be a lawyer. What was it that inspired you to want to be a lawyer and to believe that you could?
Well, it was sixth grade math. That needs
you
a
couldn't
little
be an
explanation, right? Yeah. So I grew up when the moon shot, right? Kennedy was going to take us to the moon, and I always thought it would be great if I could be the first woman on the moon. And so my goal was to be an astronaut. And then sixth grade math happened. And I realized that's probably not kind of the direction. And at the time, popular culture had...
This is why President Alivasatos became a scientist and not a senator. Because he was good at sixth grade math.
He'd be a great senator.
Yes.
I mean, and yeah. Math will get us every time. And so, and I tell people frequently, young people, and I said, when I decided in the sixth grade that I was going to be a lawyer, it really was born out of popular culture, whether it was Perry Mason or Judd for the Defense or, seeing lawyers on television.
These were, for the young people here, these were what we called television shows. So.
But the point would be that I told people that I wanted to be a lawyer, and at the time, maybe 5% of law school classes were women. By the time I ended up going to law school, 30 to 40% of my law school class were women. And it just tells you that change can happen, that things can be different. And goals that we all have, where we kind of throw up our hands and say, oh, that'll never happen. Guess what? It can happen. And so I wanted to become a lawyer. I wanted to defend all those innocent people in the judicial system.
Yeah, so you ended up in the tax department of the state of North Dakota. What happened?
Actually, I went to law school to become an environmental lawyer. I went to Lewis and Clark Law School, still recognized as probably the top environmental law school in the country. And it's probably more informative of how I got involved in politics. My grandparents were always involved, but my parents were not overly involved or overtly involved in politics. But after I got out of law school, I went to work for EPA, and I did love canal cases. And those of you who would remember, these were horrific cases where chemicals were all dumped together and they were seeping into the water supply and basically causing miscarriages across the whole Niagara Falls region. It was the kind of beginning of the awareness of the poisoning that we were doing to the environment. And so I thought, okay, this is my cause. We've passed all this great legislation, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. At the time, I think RCRA had passed. And so I went to Washington to enforce these incredible pieces of legislation. And an amazing thing happened, and it's called an election. Because we were doing all this work. I started at EPA under the Jimmy Carter administration and left the day Ann Gorsuch came to the EPA, because her job was to dismantle the EPA.
She was the head of the EPA, mother of Justice Gorsuch. Yes.
He doesn't like talking about that. I asked him about that one.
Yeah.
But I think my point is that, and why it's a good transition point on the IOP, why get involved in politics? I mean, some of you may be economists, and that's your profession. Some of you may be microbiologists. You're looking at all the things you do. And I will tell you, there's nothing that you're going to do in life that doesn't involve public policy, doesn't involve we as a collective, we the people making decisions collectively. It's really hard to do the work that you're going to do, whether it's environmental enforcement, without understanding the political structures that we've created.
I won't get into the biography of how you ended up running. You mentioned before that Ken Conrad got elected to the Senate. You run an unsuccessful race, but an impressive race for auditor. But you became, after being tax commissioner, you became the Attorney General of North Dakota. And I want to ask you about a couple of things that you focused on, which were the rights of indigenous people and domestic violence. And why were you drawn to those two? And in some ways, they were related.
Yeah, when I was tax commissioner, to keep up my law license, you had to do some pro bono work, or I thought it was important. And so you were always looking for an opportunity to volunteer. And so I volunteered doing intake for the Abused Women's Resource Center and trying to provide, and just really started becoming more aware of the impact of family violence on the future of this country. And really, kind of the pervasiveness of this as a societal problem. And so when I was transitioning...
Did you not have some history in your family?
Well, my mother, yeah, but we never talked about it. Back then, you didn't talk about it. Not in my direct family. My father and mother, didn't always get along, but we didn't grow up in a violent household. My mother was, in fact, a victim of sexual assault when she was younger, and I think carried that trauma with her. And the more we understood the trauma of sexual assault, the more we understood why my mother, what triggered my mother and why my mother would behave the way she did. And so, it's kind of that learning process. But when you look at, kind of this transition from really a pretty heavily economic job in the tax department to wanting to run for Attorney General, and people say, why do you want to be Attorney General? I said, because we have to start treating sexual assault and domestic violence as criminal behavior. If we've got to start doing what we can to stop this abuse. And what was interesting about this is it was 1992, the beginning of the Violence Against Women Act that Clinton championed, and our now president helped shepherd
Senator
through.
Biden.
Yeah, Senator Biden shepherded through but it was the highlight, or not highlight, but it was the watershed year for women running for Attorney General. And across the country, most of us were running to basically begin to tackle domestic violence as a criminal justice problem. And we didn't coordinate this. And having women elected attorneys general, guess what? That changed the dynamic at the National Association of Attorneys General. And for the first time, that was the top agenda item, because women came with an understanding of how this was affecting families and how it was affecting education, how it still affects education. On the indigenous piece, I
should point out, Illinois had elected one of those women, Lisa Madigan, who I think you worked with on some of these issues.
Yeah, well, it's amazing, because people always say, why does it matter that you have gender diversity in these jobs? We all have different life experiences. And those life experiences and the awareness that we bring to those jobs change the outcome in society, in what we do. And when you look at the indigenous piece, that wasn't something that I was familiar with. I didn't live in proximity to a reservation growing up. I didn't go to school with a lot of kids who came from who came from the reservation or who were indigenous. But my job as Attorney General was to take a look at crime and what was driving crime and who were the victims of crime. And once you started really looking at that, you realized not only do you have this challenge of sovereignty and poverty, the victimization of Native American children is 5 times higher than any other ethnic group in this country. And when you start looking at that and you start trying to understand how you're going to tackle pervasive poverty, how are you going to develop opportunities across your state, you realize you can't do it without recognizing generational trauma, without recognizing what was happening. And so probably the highest compliment I ever got as Attorney General is I was in what we called the Blue Building up at Fort Totten, and I was walking through, and there was a mom there with her little kids, and I stopped to visit, and the kids were talking to me. And I walked away, and the tribal chairman that I was with said, "Even the children on this reservation know who you are and that you care about them." And I thought, just the simple thing of showing up, the simple thing of being the state attorney general and spending time trying to tackle the problems of violence on the reservation was it's symbolic, but it matters when you show up. It matters, those life experiences that you bring. And so when I went to Washington, we'd meet with the Department of Interior. And, this was the Clinton years, and Babbitt was the Secretary of Interior, and we would go around the table, and I would always sit last. So he'd have to come to me, and I'd say, "What are we going to do for the children on the reservation?" And he would share my concern. There was a lot of sharing of my concern. And finally, the last year...
Is that like thoughts and prayers?
Yeah, thoughts and prayers. Finally, the last year, I said, "Could you just humor me once and say you're going to do something about it?" And when I ran for the Senate, and I remember thinking, now I'm that person. Now I'm that person who has an obligation. And so the first bill I introduced was the Commission on the Status of Native American Children with Lisa Murkowski. Spent a lot of time working on all of these issues, but proud of that work and really proud of the work that I did on missing and murdered Indigenous people and trying to change the outcome. We're a long way from parity in terms of criminal justice enforcement. We're a long way from protecting the people who are most vulnerable, but we have made a stand in it, and now it's in popular culture in places like Alaska Daily, which is a new drama series on ABC where they're actually tackling this issue.
You ran for governor.
Yeah.
You lost a lot of...
Only because I didn't hire David Axelrod to be my consultant.
All right, so now I'm going to have to think of a different question. But you, the thing that was most notable, like broadly about that race was that, because you talked before about bringing your own experiences and about the value of diversity, but you were diagnosed with breast cancer in the final months of that campaign. And I should point out our own Coran Otto, who's everyone knows, who's on our splendid communications director. His dad was the oncologist who treated you.
Poor guy.
But how did that play into the campaign, and how did people process that? Did it make people more inclined to support you, or did it cause people to focus more on gender in a way that hurt you?
There's two schools of thought about kind of what that was, but I can tell you a story. It was a story about a guy who came up to, we had been in a parade after the diagnosis, and my husband and I were having coffee at Kroll's Kitchen, which is very cool if you get there. Anyway, and this guy came up to me, he goes, "I'm a Democrat from the state of Washington. I just moved here. I'm able to vote." And he goes, "But I'm not voting for you." And I said, my husband said, "Why not?" And he said, "Because you're a woman and you have cancer." And my husband started kind of wanting to argue.
He was a doctor, by the way.
Yeah. And so I just kind of held up my hand and I said, "I can do nothing about either of those things, so I'm going to finish my coffee." It's like, I think my other great story about that race, and I will tell you this, if you look at one point, Sheryl Sandberg, who is famously with Facebook, wrote a book called Lean In, right?
Yeah.
And she came and she wanted to visit with all the women senators, and so we all got together with her. And I only went because I wanted her to know one thing. that 50% of the Democratic women senators had all tried to be governor and didn't get elected, but got elected to the United States Senate. It's a different role. That executive role is perceived differently. And the kind of, the First Lady during that campaign, Ed Schaefer's wife, Nancy, did what we
He was the
famously
governor
called,
at the time, yeah.
what we famously called the pink suit ad. And she's a very beautiful woman, and she had this very expensive pink suit with beautiful flowers behind her. And she started her ad saying, John Hoeven and his wife, Mikey, are not only the best equipped to lead the country into, or the state into the next, round of jobs or whatever it was that she said. She goes, but they're also the best equipped to represent North Dakota. And so finally, a woman reporter asked her what she meant by that. And she said, well, I'm concerned that my initiatives as First Lady will not be prioritized by Heidi and her husband. And so they obviously asked me for my response to that, and I said, well, those initiatives, and they said, what are your initiatives? She said, immunizations and breast cancer. Yeah, that's a true story, the end of the campaign. And so they asked me, and I said, well, on the immunization part, not only can my husband talk about the importance, but he can give them, because he's a doctor. And I said, on breast cancer, I'm just not even going to comment on that piece of this. But it was the idea of the traditional family being the patriarchy of your state. And we've now elected a number of women, strong women, in Michigan included, who are moving up the ranks. But understand, this was in 2000.
Well, let me ask you a question.
22 years later.
What are the implications of that for women running for president?
Well, I think huge. I mean, you don't look like, if people would always say, and to be fair, I used to have really, really big hair, and someone asked in a focus group once.
I admire that, by the way.
I mean, someone said, yeah, you should. Anyway, someone asked me, well, someone said, so if Heidi Heitkamp were getting off an airplane in a focus group, and I was watching this, how would you know what she's here? And without a fault, they all said, oh, you can't miss her. She's got that big red hair. They go, well, how would you know if John Hoeven was getting off the plane? They said, you wouldn't know who he was, right? He was my opponent. And so the hair was kind of definitive, but I did not look like the governor, right? I did not look.
Did your consultants tell you to get a haircut?
Yeah, if you had been my consultant.
I don't know about that.
But I think my point in all of that is that, has it changed? And I think if Hillary Clinton were here, she'd say she ran against the same kind of, predominant, we can't trust women to seal the deal, right? So that was one thing that we've heard in focus groups. We don't know that we could trust her to go into the boardroom and talk to a business and locate a business. And I had at the time had negotiated like millions of dollars worth of deals in the tax department, but I had just negotiated or helped negotiate the largest civil settlement in the history of the country, the tobacco settlement, right? So it's not about accomplishments nearly as
the hair.
The hair. Well, there's some of that, yeah. But a good hairdo is critical.
I will tell you this. I once suggested before she ran for the Senate, and I knew she was thinking of running for office. I once suggested that Hillary consider running for governor of Illinois, and I won't discuss the particulars of our conversation, but the reason was, executive positions are better if you want to really break the mold and persuade people. But anyway, you were out of politics for 12 years. Did you have a sense that you were going to get back into politics?
No, I didn't. For me, the opportunity to be governor had passed. And we had two amazing United States senators, Kent Conrad and Byron Dorgan. And so, and they were, Kent's a little bit, I think he's 8 years older than I am, and Byron's probably 14 years older, but yet both still in incredible good health. And so the idea was that there really wasn't going to be an opening to take that next step. And so what I really started, my political engagement was on the tobacco settlement, making sure that money was spent on public health. I did a number of privacy initiatives. So I got involved in kind of issue-based politics. And then Kent decided not to run and called me up.
So let me and you won by 3,000 votes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Landslide.
Yeah. Well, for a Democrat in North Dakota, not even a landslide, a miracle.
Yeah, I think a lot of people thought it was.
But I just want to talk, and I'm getting signals here to move on to Q&A, which we should. But I'm going to ignore it for 1 second and ask you about a couple of things. You went to the Senate as a kind of moderate and independent voice, as Paul mentioned in his remarks. You worked frequently across the aisle. You famously visited with President-elect Trump it was a Trump Tower, right? Isn't that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, how was that? Lots of gold? Anyway, and you voted, your voting record was very much one of crossing over on some issues, on energy issues, on gun issues, and so that reflected your state. How hard was that? I mean, and how hard is it? Why is it so difficult for people to cross party lines and reach good faith compromises in this political environment?
I don't think it is hard. I think you have to be
You better
willing.
pass the word to your former
I
colleagues.
I think you have to be willing to defend the votes you've taken, right? You have to be willing to take the controversy that comes with those votes. But you also have to be willing to risk losing. And so the problem today is that everybody sees every issue as potentially being a political liability instead of how do I vote my conscience and take the heat moving forward. And so I had lost races. I lost my first race for state auditor. I lost a very tough race for governor. I really wanted to be governor in North Dakota.
So you had practice.
Yeah, I had practice losing. No, but my point was, I knew it wasn't going to end my life. Like, life goes on. There's going to be other opportunities that you're going to be able to pursue. But if you put yourself in a little box and say, I've always got to be the United States Senator from North Dakota, then you've given your autonomy. You've given the reason why people elected you for your judgment to somebody else. Why would you give that away? Why would you give that vote to one person? And in the case of people who are myopically focused on what Donald Trump wants them to do. Why do you want the job? Then just send Donald Trump to represent you in Congress. I don't get it. And so I think that in the days
Were there also people who were myopically focused on opposing everything that Donald Trump did?
Yeah, I think, and voting against every nominee, no matter how good they were. I mean, you know, I could give you, Scott Gottlieb is a great example of this, ran FDA.
The FDA.
Yeah, and an incredible public servant. I mean, and I met him when he was under consideration. I think he maybe only got 5 Democratic votes. And he has since proven himself to be this amazing public servant talking about COVID and what we need to do with COVID. And, you know, and I'm like, this is what happens when you don't judge things on the merits of each individual case. You simply toe the party line. It's not good.
You judged in an individual case in the middle of your reelection on Justice Kavanaugh, having voted for Justice Gorsuch, and you voted against Kavanaugh. And a lot of people think that was the final nail in your political coffin.
I think it was, and I think I knew it at the time. But, you know, so people, and just to give you a reason for Kavanaugh versus Gorsuch. Gorsuch was Scalia's replacement, so it wasn't going to tip the balance of the court. It wasn't going to, I mean, you know, can you say, do you like everything Kavanaugh's done? But I will tell you this about Justice Kavanaugh. we need someone on that court who understands Indigenous rights, who understands the need to have...
You're talking about Gorsuch now.
Gorsuch, right. And Gorsuch wrote an amazing decision that was reversed a year later. But he gets the West, he gets the challenges of the West, and he was Scalia's replacement. When Kavanaugh came, I was inclined actually to vote for Kavanaugh until the hearing, the infamous hearing. And it wasn't that I necessarily, obviously Dr. Ford was compelling, critical, but I told people I turned off the sound and just watched him. And I thought, I have never seen someone more ill-equipped in temperament to be on the Supreme Court. And I also said, if somebody lies about little stuff, they'll lie about big stuff. And when people say, but your state wanted you to vote for him, I said, that's fine and good. But when you vote for a Supreme Court justice, probably behind voting to go to war, the single most important vote a senator can make, it's for 30 years. And in his case, maybe it could be for 40 years. You've got to make the judgment independent of politics on who should sit on that court. And I thought he was not good in temperament, and I thought he was not truthful, even though he took an oath to be truthful. And I think watching things pan out, I don't regret that vote for a minute, even though it probably cost me an opportunity to come back to the Senate.
Yeah, but it gave you the opportunity to be here, which we're really happy about. If you,
See, life does not end.
Anybody who has a question, please come up to this microphone here. And I think we've talked them into submission.
Yeah.
But while he's getting to the microphone, just talk a little bit about this chasm between rural and urban and how we bridge it.
I mean, this has been I think it's really bad for rural America to become one-party America. I think that that's not a solution to the problems, in part because I think there's been an enormous brain drain in rural America because people have now migrated to myopic thinking. And so to me, the solution is dialogue, and the solution is engagement and not backing down. But literally that coffee table I was talking about, those don't happen anymore because people don't want to have conflict that way. And they just let the dominant, loudest voices determine what's going to happen. And I think we've got to figure out a way to bring back a more nuanced and broader dialogue in rural America.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Norma Farrell. I'm a fourth year in the college. I was wondering if we could hear a little bit about your vision for the IOP and specifically its civic engagement programs. I'm on the board of Leaders of Color and I was involved with Spectrum, and I would really just love to hear about what you think and how you think we can make these programs better.
Well, I mean, number one, I just want to say these programs are incredible. And I wouldn't have taken this job if it weren't for the great leadership, both at the university writ large and at the IOP. And David has agreed to continue to be chair of the advisory board. It was the one little negotiating piece that I got out of the deal. But I think that
My negotiating piece was that you say nothing but nice things about the IOP.
No. What I would say in terms of civic engagement is you've got to learn how to affect the environment you're in, right? And we've got, the one thing that I think would be helpful is more developing more skills on not avoiding conflict, but de-escalating conflict. And so when I think about civic engagement and I think about the need to be out there, it's not getting in an echo chamber, but going where you're uncomfortable. Someone said, well, what piece of advice that would you give? And I tell my friends, I try and do one thing every year that takes me out of my comfort zone. And so how do we, engaging in civil discourse, how do we take ourselves out of our comfort zone? And how do we train people to do that in a systematic way to change outcomes and to have meaningful dialogue? And so to me, it's not just about macro, the outreach, it's about how do we change each person like you and make you more comfortable in going into a situation in a community, in a civic organization or in a community organization, still being able to express your opinion, but walk out in a way that makes you proud of the work that you've done. Because if I can give that skill to every student, if we can figure out how every student can become not risk adverse, but challenge themselves and listen, developing those listening skills, we can change the world in this country.
Hi, I'm Jacob. I'm a second year in the college. I'm also a Fellows Ambassador at the IOP and part of Spectrum. I'm just curious about two things. One is if there's any particular area in the IOP that you're hoping to improve or change, and also if there's any names you're hoping to bring to people here to the IOP.
I didn't get the last.
Are there
Names
any,
that you want to bring here.
Oh, I mean, one of the kind of things that I would say, and I think when people think of the IOP, they think about, you got Mike Pence coming tomorrow, Vice President Pence coming tomorrow, bringing a senator here, bringing a congressman here, bringing a governor here, and that's great, and you should learn. But there is more to democracy than elected representation. And so what do our traditional institutions like capitalism, what role do they play in democracy? There's a big debate right now, driven a little bit by what's happening in Florida, on what is woke capitalism, right? What is the role of these other institutions in furthering the goals of our democracy and the goals of civil society? And so I would say, don't look to always the big name. I might introduce you to someone you've never heard of, but yet I think they've had an impact on public policy. A great example internationally is what's our first reaction when we have conflict in the world is we're going to sanction them. How effective are sanctions? Do we ever have a dialogue about sanctions? There's a guy that I know who ran the sanctions program at the Department of Treasury. I'd love to have Adam come and talk about how that worked, because he was able to be part of the Iranian negotiations because he effectuated a broader sanctions policy across the board and worked with many, many countries and many, many financial institutions. So I would say democracy is broader than just elected representation, and we've got to start engaging what those other civic and kind of institutions are moving forward.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Carmelita Rivera. I've met David a long time ago. I'm a lifelong Hyde Parker, a lifelong Democrat. You mentioned at the beginning of your little talk about the greatest generation. I grew up, I'm a boomer, 1959, so we grew up with the period of assassinations with Kennedy, both Kennedy brothers, and Dr. King and Medgar Evers, and I live on the South Side. So guns are an issue. You're from North Dakota. I'm not sure how our views would mesh, but as a Democrat, how do we get to gun safety measures working with the few sensible Republicans that exist in Congress?
Well, I think it's interesting because I'm sure you've been following the red flag laws. I've long believed that you can, in fact, identify people who are putting society at risk, who have challenges in their life. And I can give you an example in North Dakota where the local state's attorney did, in fact, go to court and say, Mom said this guy. And now you're seeing these sheriffs basically saying, we're now going to declare this a Second Amendment sanctuary county. And that was true of El Paso County in where Colorado Springs are. That there are common ground, and even, my family, a hunting family, let me tell you that the big thing that we think is you buy a gun safe, right? that you lock up your guns, that you train your children, if they're going to be hunters, on how to hunter safety, gun safety. You know, when we were kids, we were never allowed to play with toy guns and point them at each other. That was my mother's ethic. So where's the common ground that we can express? And I think that it's growing. I think that there's a growing understanding, because one of the issues that I think drove this last midterm election and the success that Democrats had was, in fact, gun safety. And so I think the Republicans are starting to understand they can't be hell no, and whatever very extreme position, you know, the Concerned Gun Owners of America, I won't even use the NRA, because the NRA has moved to the right because of other very fringe organizations. Where can we find the common ground that can, in fact, change outcomes? But then how do we engage civically in trying to create greater community norms about safety and about respect and dignity? Because at the end of the day, it's not just about the weapon. It's about the culture that we're raising our children in. And I think it's one of the great challenges of our generation, of the baby boomers, to have that conversation.
I want to ask
the other thing I want to say is the one thing that the Supreme Court got wrong was taking away New York's right to control its sovereign interest in, and that has got, that's where states' rights meet the Second Amendment. And everybody's for states' rights until you don't like what the states do, right? Yeah. So
let me ask an elephant in the room question, because you said we should make each other feel uncomfortable. This came up when you were here. You cast a vote against this Manchin-Toomey compromise back when you were a senator. I think you may have been the deciding vote on it. I'm not sure. But, okay, good. Well, let's set that aside. But that was for expanded background checks.
Yeah.
Why did you vote against it?
Because I didn't see that as, if you want me to be ashamed of any of my vote, that's not the one I'm ashamed of. The one I am ashamed of is when I voted to basically take away, to have reciprocity on concealed carry. That was a bad.
Expand on that. What is that?
What that does, the movement on concealed carry is you have to respect your home state's concealed carry law. So anyone from Texas who's not been trained on a firearm and carries that firearm into New York, if you had national reciprocity, New York could not enforce their concealed carry laws against a Texas resident who was carrying a weapon into New York. That was a bad vote. On gun.
But why'd you make
Let me
it?
talk about. So everybody talks about Manchin-Toomey and the gun show. What that bill was is basically saying that you could not have what we would call casual sales of weapons without transfer of weapons without a background gun check. Right now, when you look at the numbers and you say how many people committing violent crime in this country buy their gun at a gun show, it's hardly any. And so this was a Second Amendment discussion without a big impact on changing the outcome. Do you see what I'm saying, David? So when you do the cost-benefit analysis on if you pass Manchin-Toomey tomorrow, pretty much nothing that you've heard in the last year would have changed. The shooter in Colorado Springs went out and bought his gun the day before, legally, from a licensed dealer. Most of these weapons are being purchased, either they're being trafficked, which I supported Gillibrand's anti-trafficking bill for guns. So
We have a huge problem with straw buyers from Indiana
right.
and Mississippi.
And
here in
those I
Chicago.
voted for, right? The straw purchase where you send your girl, we call them the girlfriend, it's probably a sexist, where you send somebody in with a clean record to buy the weapon for you. It's called a straw purchase.
Or a whole bunch of weapons.
Yeah. But I guess my point is, if we are going to do something and take on this dialogue, let's make sure what we're doing actually will have an impact long term. And I didn't think Manchin Toomey, I thought it had been so watered down not to have an impact, but I also thought that there were better ways to focus, and one would have been on Kirsten Gillibrand's straw purchase.
We have a couple.
trafficking.
We
Yeah.
have a couple more questions here. Now we have 3 more questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Yeah.
My name is Miles Zaremski. My background is in healthcare law and policy. I've taught at the law school here. In my prior life, I was in Big Ten athletics. So my question is really focusing forward on the IOP, and the focus really is the intermixing of politics and sports. And I give you 2 examples. One is obviously Herschel Walker in the state of Georgia, and people saying, well, he was a big football star, albeit just for 2 years. But even this morning, Iran wants to bar the U.S. soccer team from further participating because of an issue with their flag, I believe.
Yep.
And I was just thinking, how is, the politics of our nation infiltrating sports at the highest level, at least in your point of view?
Well, I think probably a more heightened example would be Kaepernick taking a knee and leading a movement of protest at sporting events, basically saying, or the Olympics. I mean, you can show example after example. Muhammad Ali, we've never had an effective separation between America's cultural attachment to sports and our political engagement. The question is, how do these figures, whether it is a Herschel Walker, I mean, I take Herschel Walker and say, if he had not been 34, right, and a Heisman, would he be the nominee? The answer is no. But we all have those life experiences, right? We all have, and so that's not to say a sports figure should never be a political figure. This morning at the IOP, I was saying in a dream world, I think we should be talking more about public education and what that means to the democracy as an institution. Look at what LeBron James is doing in Akron. I mean, I'm just fascinated by how engaged he is at a very local level in trying to change outcomes in education. Now, LeBron James is not a PhD in education. In fact, he didn't go to college, but yet he is leading an effort. And so I think anytime you look at a cultural institution like sports in America, you're also going to have a political engagement, a political tug of war, let's say, over who gets to decide, whether football is too woke, whether baseball's too woke, or whether it's too violent. I don't know.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just saying.
You know that the
sports
first Heisman Trophy winner was from the University of Chicago. That's true. Jay Berwanger is the model of the Heisman Trophy. I know, it's astonishing.
I didn't even know you had a football team.
Mr. President, perhaps you'd like to reintroduce women's soccer. Okay, there you go. Yes.
Hi, my name is Yang. I'm a PhD student in sociology. So I've been in this university long enough to witness many speakers and fellows, ranging from Rana Ayub from India, Judge Ayubi from Afghanistan, and Dr. Waji from Gaza. And IOP has been such a treasure trove for me to cure my political apathy and sometimes salvage me from political depression. And thank you, David. You're such a treasure.
Thank you.
For this university.
I so appreciate that. Thank you.
So for international students like me who have engaged with speakers and fellows around the globe, so what is your vision for helping these young people to harness the IOP experience and inspire them to think long and hard about the fate of their own country, make their voice heard, and act smartly in their respective country to expand their democratic space?
Such an important question.
Absolutely, and I think that the most important thing that you can do is say, back at you. What do you want the IOP to do different than what we've been doing in bringing in speakers? How can we enhance skills, enhance the notion of what you can do with this great education that you're getting here at the University of Chicago to change outcomes, not just in this country, but globally? So my argument would be, or my response would be, you tell me, right?
Yeah.
What would you change?
Yeah, Tom's to say, but hopefully to have more engagement with you.
We will have this dialogue, so now you're on the hook.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'll be
thank
the
you.
panel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Last question here.
Hi, my name is Alon. I'm longtime Hyde Parker. I wanted to hear your thought about open primaries and ranked choice voting as a way to reduce polarization and gridlock in our politics.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. Let's take a look at what just happened in Alaska. So why was Alaska important? Alaska was important because the two Republicans who ended up on the ballot with the Congresswoman, with Mary, Begich and Sarah Palin.
See how quickly we forget?
Right. Did not take out after each other. And so when you have Final Five or Final Four, there's a movement led by a woman from here in Chicago,
Yes.
Catherine Gill.
Yeah. Gil, yeah.
Yeah, and I've done seminars with her. And the idea is not that it will, help get representation in the middle, which it will, but it also changes how people behave, right? So why do I say that? Because if David and I and two other people are in this, and I think my competition's David, I want people who are going to vote for David to list me second on the ranked choice. And so I'm not going to attack David. It's not going to be, because all of these other people get a second choice. And so I can't alienate in the dialogue. It doesn't become a binary war. It becomes a dialogue about what's best for the community. So we have to have primaries where who emerges is not just people from the far right or the far left. We have to have a change in how we elect our representatives, and then ranked choice behind that changes the nature of campaigns.
Yeah.
So I am a big fan of this as a movement. I think it will change American politics. And when people say we need to go and amend the Constitution, I'm like, do you understand what a big deal that is? But if we can do institutional changes in how we vote and when we vote, making sure everybody gets a chance to vote, but that when they go to the polls, they aren't plugging their nose saying, I'm picking the lesser of two evils, they actually are excited about the representation.
The voters
So I
in
agree.
Nevada just
voted
for it.
They've got to vote again on it, I guess.
Yeah, I think they have to do it twice.
Yeah. But the Democratic Party in Nevada came out against it. You're going to find the dominant political party in states come out against it because that takes away their structural power, because they like that binary choice. And I think when you realize that in Alaska, you elected a moderate senator and you elected a moderate congresswoman. And I think they're going to do a terrific job for the state of Alaska. And neither one of them would have gotten elected without the electoral changes that were made in the state of Alaska.
Thank
So
you.
I'm a big fan.
For your question. Well, one thing that should be clear to everybody here is that you're going to do a terrific job.
That I
here.
have a lot of opinions.
I am I'm so excited, Heidi, to have you here. And we should have pointed out, your connection was not just that you were a fellow here, not just that you've been on the advisory board, but you're also a parent of an alum of the University of Chicago. So you have deep connections to this place.
Do, and I think this is under past leadership, but certainly the leadership of this president had a chance to be persuaded by him as well that this would be a fit. And I will tell you, this is a place that is committed to dialogue. Maybe not dialogue that always makes you comfortable, but a dialogue that can in fact shape and grow ideas in a way that will make implementation of those ideas possible. And so I was a fellow at Harvard, I was a fellow at Brown. I always said,
These are schools in the East.
Yeah, I always tell people, I was a fellow at all these places who wouldn't have accepted me if I had applied when I was a kid. But the one thing I will tell you is this is an interesting program because it was started and initiated by a practitioner, by somebody who actually knows how this works. But it was also started by somebody who learned at this institution the value of thinking. And so you have this unique combination of somebody who is really strangely academic, even though he claims he was not an academician, but who is—
I have a lot of professors who would attest to that.
Right. But who was thinking, and thinking big ideas, and how do you accomplish these things, who came to politics to change outcomes in how we live our lives and how we move this democracy forward, but had that practical experience. And I think that's a combination here that you should be so proud of. It's a legacy that is challenging for me to continue, and I am incredibly grateful for this opportunity.
Wow.
Thanks, David.
You know, I've never been more confident about someone taking that legacy and improving on it. Paul, I just wanted to say, and I should have said at the outset, this would not have happened but for the investment of the university, and Katie Callow Wright is sitting over here, who's been a champion of ours from the get-go. But you know, Bob Zimmer committed to it. You've been as committed as he. And the reason we can be who we are is because the university has backed us from the beginning. And so, you know, I'm not sure this could have happened anywhere else, and I'm so grateful for that.
I want to leave you with one thought, and it's about the importance of the work that's done at the IOP. You have in your president a world-renowned chemist who understands the absolute critical nature across the board in all disciplines of the importance of free expression and thinking. And leadership like that is unfortunately way too rare. Somebody who has that incredible knowledge and experience, but yet understands the importance of the work that's done in civic discourse. So congratulations to the university.
Yeah, and
Thank
what
you
could be
for
more
embracing it.
important, I mean, for the Institute of Politics than chemistry, right? So thank you very much.